Hey, we got a couple walkers. So good, so good. I drove. I'm sorry. But we'll fix that next time. Cool. I'll do announcements.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Well, what's good?
So I'm Brandon Johnson.
I'm Anna Baker.
We have two other organizers.
Tamara Temple is not here today, but she is a new organizer to the group.
And Brian Mitchell is going to be giving a lightning talk and is waving for from over there.
So welcome to our new organizer. It's exciting to have fresh blood.
So many pals, it's so great.
So obviously we are in a new space. We want to give a shout out to WeWork for hosting us. Specifically, we have D'Angelo.
Yep, D'Angelo.
Michael and Britt. Where's D'Angelo?
He's in the back. And the WeWork folks who are super awesome might also be busy itinerant doing other things to help us in that room.
Okay, so
we
we can just give
appreciate
them
them
a
all.
round of applause.
Yay, round of applause. Yes. At some point, Michael from WeWork is going to come up here during the announcements portion and kind of talk about things. But I think I can see him in the back working right now, so he'll join us in a second. One other logistical thing about WeWork will be covered later, which is where the bathrooms are. Which will be covered now, which is right back behind the elevators to the left. Thanks again to WeWork for hosting us. We really appreciate it.
All right, we are sponsored by 4 different organizations today, in addition to WeWork, our host. The first one is Twilio. Has anyone heard of Twilio or used Twilio? It's one of the bigger cloud communications platforms out there, and their API does voice, messaging, and video.
They also just bought SendGrid, which is a company that does like transactional email stuff, which is super massive and bonkers and cool. And
so they are right in the middle of taking the world.
Yeah, right.
We appreciate their support. So round of applause for them.
We'd also like to thank Track.js. Track.js provides JavaScript error monitoring services, and it's actually like a really awesome homegrown product based in Stillwater, which is super cool. Gotta love Stillwater, representing the East Metro counties. And Todd from Track.js has been a strong supporter of JavaScript event for a long time. He actually debuted an early version of the product at this event, and we really appreciate Track.js's support and Todd's support. As it's been continuing for some time.
Next up, we have Front End Masters, which is a local training organization for everything front end. Anything front end you can think of, they pretty much do. Mark is the leader, the organizer, founder of everything Front End Masters.
We actually have some Front End Masters people in the audience. They can just indicate to me whether or not they'd like to come up and say hi and be applauded to. But if they don't wish to, that's totally okay.
Yeah.
And
do you
it
want to
looks like
shout
that's
out yourself?
And that's okay.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
so good.
Here you go. Round of applause.
I'm Lainey and this is Krista. Hi. So we're with Front End Masters and we're hiring. So feel free to send your resumes to mark@frontendmasters.com.
Awesome.
Oh, and then we're doing Python for us, so we're extending beyond like just the front end, so it's pretty cool.
So good.
And even if you don't go work for them, you should subscribe to their courses because they are lovely.
And go for it.
Consider going to one of their live workshops that they have from time to time. You get on the list, you can get really cool exciting emails from Mark and friends that let you know where you should go to do free workshops that are very good.
They're super great and awesome and bring people from like various core teams, like the React core team, the Vue core team, all the core teams. You can't count. There are too many core teams. And it's great. Really worth watching. Yeah, we had people from CHRU too.
Talk about Kim?
No? Brian. Okay, here you you go. Go for it, buddy.
Hi, Steve Robinson is a third-party logistics and supply chain manager.
Mike does do a good job. You guys talk loud.
Yeah.
Steve Robinson is a third-party logistics and supply chain management company in Eden Prairie. We have a lot of development out there. We're really excited to sponsor JavaScript Minnesota.
Thanks, Steve Charles.
Does that help if we really get into the mic there? All right, you're gonna have to get into the mic. All right, that's as loud as it goes.
Is that better? Yeah.
Okay, you obviously found us if you found us on probably the internet, but if you haven't hooked up with us via these social media presences, you should definitely go find us. We have a website, javascriptmn.com. We are on YouTube and we do live stream these events, so if you're at home and ever find yourself unable to make it here in person, go to YouTube and check us out live. You can tweet or write us questions if you want to ask those things live. Or if you don't, you can check it out. Either way, you should follow us on YouTube.
So good.
We are also on Slack. If you want an invite to that, just reach out.
And we'd love for you to speak. We really value raising up the people who attend and contribute to this community and helping them kind of practice their speaking skills, show what they're working on, show what they're excited about, and that this can be a really awesome place to do that. And sometimes we give you free stuff. Like for example, we are going to have T-shirts next time, and I designed them. And so take that however you will.
So I'm going to start working your thoughts right now.
Yeah. So there you go.
And if you're thinking to yourself, that sounds great, but I'm too junior or too green or I don't know enough, that's a lie. Take whatever you think is interesting right now and lob it at us, and you can talk about it at any level, really low level.
Absolutely. Yes. So JavaScript MN and our events, our events that occur IRL, our communities that exist online, are governed by this code of conduct. By attending, you agree to abide by the code of conduct. We have some information about that on the website, and that's really like the ultimate governing document of what I'm about to say. But for the purposes of announcements, I'm just going to say the most important thing is this is a place where people feel safe, people feel comfortable, and above all else, that's what we're trying to uphold. So if there's anything that you need assistance with as far as making that happen, or if you have any concerns related to the code of conduct or behavior concerns, reach out to either of us, any of the organizers, recognizing that Anna and I are the most visible of the organizers right now, or email us. All reports and discussions there are confidential, of course.
To an individual level.
To an individual
If you want to
level,
adopt one of us, that's fine.
Yep.
All of us, that's fine. We're a safe place to be. Okay, so the openness clerk to announcements. If anybody in the room in the community has jobs that they are looking for, to work for, jobs that they're looking to fill, events that they want to talk about, other meetups they want to shout out, now's your time.
Anybody?
Going once?
I think
There are things to get. Jason.
Jason Silk, looking for a position, for a development position, and my main area of expertise is Ruby on Rails, actually. But I also did using Yakisaurus based on React for static websites.
Awesome. I think we have another announcement.
I am looking for a job right now. I graduated with a master's in marketing, and I'm really picking that up. And also looking for anything front end and back end.
Did you say your name?
Jay.
Awesome. Congrats. Thanks. And I know we have Michael from WeWork.
Hey guys, I'm Michael. We work a part of the community team here. Just wanted to welcome you guys to WeWork as a whole. Appreciate you guys business card on you. You can pitch it in the cylinder over here. If not, there's a little piece of paper you can just throw in the bowl as well. Okay. Cool. Thanks again.
Awesome.
Can we get it?
All right, it's all hand over here.
Yeah.
Go for it. Yeah.
My name's Jeremy. I'm looking for a development position working with React. I've got about 10 years of experience, actually probably close to 12 now, working with PHP frameworks, and I'm branching out into JavaScript. So I've been using it on a few freelance projects, but I'm looking for more steady work.
Right on. Thanks. Congrats.
Hi, I'm Michael Devera. I'm a software developer. I'm actually pretty experienced. I have Node experience, I have React experience, I'm proficient in JavaScript. I'm just rolling off a contract, so I'm open and immediately available. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. I know you spoke at JSMN a couple months ago.
I did.
Good talk.
The fountain pattern.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Any other announcements? Did I see a hand up in the back? No?
I have one. No one else is coming.
Go for it.
Okay. Minibar, you all know hopefully what that is, and if you don't, you should definitely go check it out. Mini Star is the nonprofit group that hosts an all-day event called Mini Bar, and it is on Saturday the 27th. It's an all-day event down in Bloomington, and it's a really great free place to go check out a whole series of tech talks from the community all day. I already have my calendar. The tickets go out on the 11th, and they do tend to sell out. So I just wanted to shout out that to all of you.
Couple addenda to that. If you volunteer at a Ministar event, you can get free attendance and guaranteed attendance, which is maybe the more important thing, I guess, because Minibar is
It is free.
So guaranteed attendance is what I meant to say. Which can be super awesome. There are other ways you can get guaranteed attendance too if you're a Ministar like community supporter, but that does cost money. But that's always
Which is
great.
something you should also consider if you're in that position.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. There are a couple other meetups that I want to shout out real quick. One, I think, is it RailsConf or RubyConf that's coming to Minnesota like yesterday? RailsConf. Yeah, awesome. RailsConf is going to be super cool, and I can't afford it, but maybe you can. And maybe if you're interested in Rails, it brings a lot of really cool people to town. Maybe you can, I don't know, watch the Twitters and run into them and high five them and say, "Hey, Rails person, you're cool." I don't know, they're cool sometimes. Minneapolis Junior Devs is another event that's happening second week of April. I think it's April 9th. Tickets, I think, are about to go out or just went out. And usually they go quickly. So if you're a junior developer or are interested in becoming a developer, that can be an awesome event to attend. It's also going to be about speaking at meetups. So if you're interested in speaking at a meetup and want to get another pep talk, you can go to that event, or you can just ask me because I will give you infinite pep talks about speaking at meetups. Take your pick.
Okay. Any other announcements? All right. So next month's meetup.
Oh, I made a mistake.
Last month's slide. We're going to tell you that we're going to be here today, and here we are. Right? No news?
Yep. No other news.
I like the thoughts.
Perfect. So we got Brian to talk us through React and TypeScript.
Awesome.
Check, check, check. Hello, I'm Brian Mitchell. I'm also an organizer here at JavaScript Minnesota. Sorry. Is this better? Okay. Speak loud, super close to the microphone. Great.
I'm a software engineer at C.H. Robinson. I pretty much focus on front end and lately a lot with TypeScript and React. So just as an opener, who has React experience here? OK, good amount. Who has TypeScript experience? Fair. What about together? OK, cool. So this will cover aspects of both and how to use them together. So if there's something you're not familiar with, please chime in, and I can do my best to briefly explain it. So I'll just do a brief overview of TypeScript. It's a superset of JavaScript that introduced static type checking, which can provide more safety in your code as you write it and before you ship it out to customers and potentially have runtime issues. It is open source. It's backed by Microsoft, recommended by Angular. It now has first-class support for Create React App. And recently, it got support from Babel. So existing tooling can continue to work as is. Some pros for developing are things like auto-completion, compile time errors. This can bring additional stability to your code. And it can kind of make APIs that you use in libraries kind of self-documenting almost. And it has pretty good tooling these days. Some cons are it's more tooling to deal with. And you generally are going to write a little more code to define all of these types. And it's yet another thing to learn if you're starting a new tech stack or a new project. But I think it's worth it. So here's a very brief example of a simple React component that where am I? So this is an example component. It's just some form inputs, some change handlers. It's a control input, and then some handlers. I am using hooks, but that's not really important right now. So this looks pretty standard to JavaScript, with the addition of this little syntax here of defining the type for something. I'm going to skip over to just some very pure functions first, which are easier. So we have a simple text thing here, and then a number input, which can do various things with it. So let's look at an example. So this form input sets some, let's look at the number. It's a little more into it. So we take our number, comes out of it, we turn it into a number. And then when we render this nice message on the bottom, we're running through a display function. So now, depending on your IDE, this might be a little different, but you can jump in and see, oh, it's tiny. It says display takes text, which is of type string, and num, which is of type number, and it returns a string. So those are the types that I've defined in our helper function here. So you can very easily see the order of your arguments and what types they should be. So say I was writing an app and I wasn't sure how to use it. Maybe I thought the number came first. So I could switch these inputs. Uh-oh, there's a red line. Argument of type number is not assignable to parameter of type string. So that's a very simple example. So this just calls some other string methods. Let's see. So what was I going to do here? Yeah, so right now we can, this date, you can see if we add a bunch of numbers, it's in the future. So I have the word until. If we remove it and make it in the past, it'll say since. So this is a ternary operator. We just compare the current date against the date that we pass in, that we're creating from that number. And we're using the word since or until. So TypeScript's actually going to do some type inference here. And it's going to say that prefix can only be the string literal since or until. And so you can see const prefix is string, pipe, and then until. So then if we wanted to later on say, oh, I think that's a string type, we can introduce some code that will check it. But TypeScript will tell us that prefix can only be since or until. And test has no overlap, or that can't ever be a true condition. So that seems kind of helpful. This is nice for if you're jumping in code that you haven't worked on in a while and you're making a small change. You can have your TypeScript compiler quickly say, that should be good, or that may not work. Yeah, I'll touch on hooks a little bit here. So if you're using some state, it can infer the type. So this is saying we're passing in a string, so it's going to say this is of type string, same with a number. Now, when you get to more complicated types, this gets a little more tricky. So say we have an array, and we want to say, start it as an empty array. Cool, but what is that array of, or what types are in that array? So if we try to then set that array to something like array is, with the first index is, this is just a string, it's going to say that's a warning because we've never told TypeScript what type it is. So as we make changes, we can, we can do something like string. So now it knows it's an array of type string. String array. And then it will do that check for us. This can be handy, especially with objects when you're storing lists of complicated data to build tables or something else. Any questions so far? Cool. All right, a little more complicated. Let's do some, oh geez. Uncomment. OK, so we have an event page here. Basically, this isn't so important right now. We're taking an array of data, and we're mapping it to an event components. And so this is an event, this is an event, this is an event. We're using that same thing I just showed here. So it's an array of this interface, or type. And we're starting it at if we go into our event data here, so this is our API function that we're calling from, or our fake API function from our event page. So it's a promise. We're getting some data. That loader stuff is going on there. So we're just returning some static data. I'm not actually calling an API. But we're saying this data array that it returns is event data array. So it's the same one that was in that state. And this API is typed to say, it's going to return a promise of event data array. And so we're telling TypeScript at every level, this is what it should be, this is what it's going to return. I think we might even be able to delete this, and it will, no, it won't. Depending on your setup and how you're, maybe it's in set timeout or using this promise here. I might be missing a event data array to do that, but. Event data is an interface. This is how you describe the structure of an object. So rather than just allowing any key with any value, we can say, OK, an event data has a meetup, which is string, title, string, URL, string, date, string, tag, tag, and details string. So in some of my work, I use union types like this. So this means this is a type that we're creating, and it's this string, or this string. That's the only things that will check the compiler, or the compiler will pass. So say we want to add, maybe not web. What's a platform as a tag. Now we have our type error here because it's, I could type it up here as well. That might help for better errors. There we go. So now it says, type platform is not assignable to type tag. So it helps for quickly being able to see what is a valid option for something or not. This is super handy for things like API parameters. So if you have an API that takes an enum of certain values, you can define these as types here. And then as you pass those values around your application, you can quickly know if something is going to maybe pass or fail on your API. All right, so then let's look at our event here. This is this area is pretty straightforward of just putting the markup on the page. I also added a little feature for filtering. So if we want to say event, maybe we want to just look at today. We'll add a little package. So it's basically going to filter on the title containing a URL match. So this brings to another point. So you can also combine types. So this single event component will take in data from the event data array. So we've already defined that, so that's great. So that's going to be in our props. But we can also join in other data. So you can do something like, maybe we want to make an interface. Cool prop, let's say it's a string. We could add this to our types here. And now cool prop is a required string on this event component. And now it's going to fail to compile because we're not actually, or further up in our event page component, we're not passing in cool prop. So if we add cool prop and give it the value hello, now it should compile. Great. So we can use the intersection operator here, or we can use something like extends event data. So this might be a little more familiar for traditional object-oriented programming languages. And then we could maybe remove event data from here because it's already being pulled in this interface. So there are multiple ways to do that. So match is coming from our router. That's just another object that has the property match, actually. So it allows us to quickly change things. So another nice use case is if we're changing some type on an API or something, and maybe there's lack of communication between teams working on something, and maybe I've used tools to let you import types from a web service. And so say our date changes to, or our date changes to a date type. So let's give it some fake, turn these into dates. The most interesting thing. Cool, so now they're dates, and this type is great, but in our component, we can see that our types have changed on us. And this might be something way upstream that maybe your part of the application doesn't deal with that, but you say, you're loading up one day, you update from Git, and you see, oh, the TypeScript doesn't compile. And you can go through and see, OK, it's date. It's actually, or it's not a string, it's actually a date. So maybe to locale date string. In this case, that would be to locale date. Oh, I'm using maybe to ISO string. I didn't test this specific example beforehand. But I think you get the idea. Those are, OK, now I can't leave it without it, with it not compiling. API, undo, undo, undo. So those are just a few examples of cases where I've gotten some benefit from using TypeScript while working on a React UI. There are tons of other additional things you can do, especially with generics. So you can have components. So you want to render a table of data, and you have common interactions and when to fetch data and doing pagination or filtering. But the data isn't really important to that. You can pass in a generic data type, and it will then you can use that, and you can do type checks all throughout. This function component type here, the props are a generic on that type. Actually, I should probably say, so at least in WebStorm here, maybe you can do it. I know Visual Studio Code lets you as well. So we can find a type here. I'm doing command click or control click on Windows. And you can literally pull up the type definition for those out of libraries. So we can see, in this case, FC is shorthand for function component. But then you can see all of the types that are on a certain type that you're using, or all the properties or extra features. So you can kind of look through, say, OK, this is going to be a function that has some props, and then this P here comes from the generic P. And in this case, they're initializing it to be an empty object literal, which in this case means it's kind of an empty interface. So it's allowing you to use the component with no extra props. Question mark is optional, so it means it can be either the type given there or undefined. So that's really handy. You'll see, especially in React and a lot of other libraries, the union type is used a lot for, you're going to pass in, it returns a React element or null. I think even like React element has, you can get lost in all of these types. There are tons and tons of crazy things you can do in TypeScript. Yeah, I'm kind of rambling now. Any questions?
So in this function here where you're returning a bunch of HTML, the root element is like not an element. Is TypeScript doing some sort of like compilation to like something the browser can understand?
That is short for React fragment. So React fragment, if you're not familiar, lets you kind of wrap some React.create elements or JSX elements. So if we didn't have this here, it would be returning, when this compiles down, it returns an array of 2 elements, this h2, or 3, this paragraph and the last paragraph. And actually, you can see TypeScript here is saying this isn't valid, so it's not going to compile. And you can see it's not the best clue, but left side of comma operator is unused and has no side effects. This just means that a React component can't return an array of data, at least without changing the type. So it's when you would wrap it in a fragment. Any other questions?
How did you load it in to begin with? Is there like an npm install command?
This is using Facebook. I think they own it. Create React App. So they have tooling out of the box for both JavaScript and TypeScript. So I think if you do create React App, const enum, and that's dealing with module level and bundling, and won't get into that. But for the most part, Babel support is really great, and it's let us use our existing JavaScript tooling to add TypeScript support on top of it. And that's really powerful for migrating over to TypeScript without changing your entire build pipeline and tooling. Furthermore, I bet many of you are using TypeScript today already in type hints in libraries. A lot of IDEs will pull in their TypeScript definitions for suggesting this parameter is this type. Libraries can use like JSDoc to have comments that'll type things for you, but TypeScript will also be used in those situations. Cool. That's all I got.
So I think we probably have time for one more short lightning talk, like 5 minutes. Anyone have anything they want to share? Anything they want to demo? Because if y'all don't, then I have something.
But first, we should shout out that we didn't say it before, but if you ever have a lightning talk on the spot,
Yes.
something to note about something, you do not have to come talk to us first. I mean, you do right before you talk, but not any time before that.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you are sitting to yourself thinking, sitting there to yourself, that I too could do something like what Brian just did, and if you want to do it, now is your chance. We will make him wait.
Yeah, please make me wait. That would be
We
awesome.
hear a lot. Can you hear me in the back this time? Am I any better? Better than before? No, Randall doesn't like it. Louder. Better? Okay. Okay, any takers? Otherwise, I just wanted to plant that seed into your heads for next time.
Yes.
Okay, well, then black.
Okay.
Round of applause for Brandon.
No, freestyle. Okay. So I think it was the 25th anniversary of something recently. It might have been the World Wide Web, it might have been the internet, I can't remember which. It's one of those. And as part of that, swipe. Thank you, Brandon. As part of that, I wanted to show you all one of my favorite websites. dangerous action that nonetheless I must undertake. Oh, hey, look, there's me. Perfect. There's somebody else. That's also cool. Shout out to Riley. So I'm just going to go ahead and, yes, so one of my favorite websites, this is a website about embroidery. Have any of you seen this before? I know Phil's seen this before because I shared this in a Slack group. But embroidery is really cool. One of the things you can kind of see it here, unfortunately I spoiled it, is that the thing about embroidery is it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And it just keeps going. This is like an international treasure, I swear to God. No shame whatsoever to the folks who made this, because this is a mistake that I feel like we all made from time to time. I know I've made it countless times. I believe what's happening here, and folks can correct me if I'm wrong, I think what happens is they're like continuously open header tags, so the header tags that are open just kind of keep cascading is probably the wrong word, because that's a very specific meaning in this context. But kind of as things go on, there are all these open header tags that just keep making the text bigger, 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 and bigger, and it never stops. So if you ever want to like laugh for an hour straight, you can just keep doing this. Look at that, and eventually there's just one letter, and then there are fewer than one letter, and then there's like fractions of letters, and sometimes you scroll so fast that Chrome starts to freak out. So there you go, SonyEmbroideryWarehouse.com. I had nothing to do with this, it's just super cool. And that could be a lightning talk.
That's a great example of where the bar is for lightning talks.
No, absolutely. That is, yeah.
Now we're going to have a 10-minute break.
10-minute break.
10-minute break. So finish the pizza, finish the salad, chat amongst yourselves, and then when you come back, we will have our main presentation for the evening. Thank you.
Okay, all right.
There we go. Perfect.
Hello, JavaScript. Come on back. We're gonna get started. What? Did it get louder? A little bit? No? I have to keep talking.
It's okay.
All right. Grab your food or your drink or whatnot and come on back. I'm gonna get the people outside.
She's just grabbing the people from outside.
Sounds like they do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, talk right into it.
Should you want me to just say hello and start?
Want me to introduce you?
If you want, yeah, sure. I did elevate the mic, Skelko. Like an E, but it's actually an A.
Hey, JavaScript! Welcome back. I want to introduce our main presentation for the evening. If you're hearing me, clap your hands. If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me, clap 3 times. Okay, we have Zach Skelko tonight with building your own package. What? How?
Hey everyone. Yeah, so we already got the title, and you probably already saw it in the meetup invite. So I'll just introduce myself. Howdy, I'm Zachary Skelko. I'm a senior software engineer at Cargill. My Twitter handle is Zappleby. I'll actually be like sharing live links from here to there if you want to follow along on your own machine. But let's just get into it, right? What is a package? This is kind of the overview of what I'm going to talk about here. How do some...
And why should I even do this thing? It can be intimidating to
start out and actually contribute code back to a community. It can be daunting to try and figure out when my application is right to break into smaller modules. It can be even harder when you start to layer on the complexity of build tools or additional configurations. I just want to write code, right? I just want to write my application. I want to make it work for my client or for myself and my own personal project, right? So to go into what is a package, right? It's some code. It can be reused easily. Has everyone worked with NPM? I assume that this whole room was, yep, okay, so one, no, okay. Using other languages have like a really clean, like pretty uniform way to import things, right? Java, straight import. Python, import. And even ES6 has a really clean standard import syntax, right? Obviously, there are other languages which use other keywords like include or whatever, but usually these languages have one way to get code from another package or from another repository into your code base. JavaScript doesn't. In fact, there are really 4 ways to load all 4 of these are ways to import jQuery into an application. One, the ES6 standard, the common JS syntax, the required JS syntax, and then a script tag, right? It just attaches to the window object on a immediately invoked functional expression. So, I mean, we've all dealt with this, right? Like, part of this is that not all browsers are running the same version of JavaScript, right? You can use modern JavaScript, like const and arrow functions inside of a Chrome browser. You can't use them elsewhere, right? So part of the reason that we have this like divergent ecosystem is we can't say what version our users are going to run. We want to make sure that we have the right version on each of those machines. So I'm going to go through two real-world examples of how packages have decided to bundle together code in a way that is executable in many different JavaScript environments. Class names. Is anyone familiar with this package? It's great. It's a super simple function that allows you to pass an object or a list of strings into a function and get back a class. Painful logic to write again and again, and we use it in applications all the time. 3 million weekly downloads, and it's one file. It's one file that is written in a compatible JavaScript that exports for any of those different environments. In this case, we start by looking at the ES6 definition. We're going to, and the common JS definition. Modules.exports. How many people work with Node? Okay, cool. So you're familiar with the common JS syntax, require and modules.exports. And if anyone has worked with React, you may not have known it, but you're using the ES6 import syntax, right? So the first thing we do is we look for if module exists while this code is running. If it does, or if it's not undefined and it's got a property called exports, we're going to add something to that. And ES6 is able to pick up module exports, but in order to do that, we have to add a default, right? Because when you, actually I'm going to just flip to some code right here. So this is implicitly taking the default export on a common JS syntax, right? So if I was looking at, with ES6, you also have the ability to conditionally import other things, right? So back to, so that handles those two cases. Again, that's the default. I should have looked ahead in my slides. Additionally, we're going to look if there is the define function and if it's got an object type .amd, right? If those are true, we're going to use that define, and we're going to declare a function that has this unique syntax specifically for a required JS or an asynchronous module definition is what AMD stands for. And last, like if none of those other things are true, we're going to attach to the window object. We don't actually even, like class names doesn't even do the work of checking to make sure that the window object exists, because it assumes that if none of those other conditions are there, we're obviously in a browser context. So that allows you to then just use it as a script tag, right? I'm going to, as soon as that's loaded, I can use it in a browser. This is super simple. We've just got a main.index, which defines both the code to do the work as well as the as well as the actual module wrapping, right? I'm gonna pull up this example here. So you can see we've got our function declared here, and then this little bit of code to allow it to be used in whatever JavaScript context we're going to use. This is great, right? And if I have a very simple, bigger voice, bigger, okay. Bigger code, okay. Okay, super simple if I've got a simple function that does one thing and needs to be allowed into all these different contexts, right? It's just this class names function. Where this starts to break down is if you have something of a bigger thing and wants to use newer syntax or wants to use any other module, this pattern just isn't going to work. But in some cases, it's really the right choice. In this case, I would definitely agree that it is the right choice. This example I'm going to walk through is the way that Vue.js builds and packages its module, its package. Vue, if it's the third big one, not Angular, not React, Vue. It's got about 1 million weekly downloads. And it's got a bunch of different definitions that it actually spits out. It's got its main, which is its common JS syntax, and it's got a runtime that comes out in the ECMAScript module definition, right? The way it does this is it has this big config list of a bunch of different builds that it wants to do. I'm going to see if I can pull this, if this link is going to work. I should have. Yes. So we have a runtime, a web runtime, a web common JS, a full common JS, a bunch of different ones, right? This suddenly has exploded in complexity to the point where I was looking for a big player that had like a legible config. This is as close that I got to it. This can be like extremely intimidating to someone just starting with just starting. The tool it uses to do all these builds is Rollup. Is anyone familiar with Rollup? Has anyone built a package with Rollup? One. Perfect. Okay, cool. You're the audience then for this. I kind of already talked about how the advantages to approach one. It's clean and pretty, no additional dependencies, but it's not scalable and can't use everything. It's the exact opposite for approach 2, right? It's scalable, and but it's not clean and pretty, and it's actually kind of painful to get started with. So we're going to build a package. Hodorify replaces all words in a string with Hodor. If you want to follow along, you can actually follow this link that, but actually, let's just keep going. Hodorify, it's a simple function, right? So similar to class names, right? It's a really simple function. It takes a subject string, runs a regular expression on it, and replaces it with the word Hodor. Is everyone familiar with Hodor? You can only say Hodor? Okay. So Hodor, Hodor, Hodor. I'll do the rest of my talk in, no, I won't actually. But Game of Thrones character, I'm very excited about the last season coming up. So I just had to get this out here. Yeah, it could be Groot, right? Yes, perfect. Everyone is familiar with either Groot or Hodor. Wait, no, that actually is really like that's a lot of overlap. So let's switch to code. Okay, as I said, we can use this same very simple definition that class names uses because we have a really simple function, right? In fact, I've wrote some tests for this because every good package that published should have tests. That is published should have tests, but I accidentally added the. Okay, so basically what we're saying is we should expect this package to ta-da, I didn't, yep. Sorry, I merged the wrong branch here. Oh, I see. Yep, definitely merged the wrong branch here. Shouldn't have had two tests for this first one. So one thing you'll probably notice is that this isn't working still. I'm going to just check out my, move to my next branch because what you saw from that code, right, is that it doesn't actually do any like case sensing, right? It just everything is lowercase Hodor. Not perfect. Okay. In this case, we're still, oh, this is my deleted from disk one, deleted from, don't save, please. We've kind of changed our, the directory structure here. You'll notice this in a lot of like bigger packages that you end up with a source directory and a dist directory. Obviously, the big difference with dist is it's what you're meant to send out. Dist is always, and practically always, the result of some kind of transpile or build process, right? We want to make sure that we're not, we only want to maintain one code base, but we want to be able to distribute it to a bunch of different platforms. So first, that changes the way that we can actually use code, right? We're going to import another package called case, which is going to do a little bit of different logic and then export our default, right? So great. Suddenly we've introduced syntax that can't be used in older browsers. What we're going to do instead is we're going to build it with Rollup. We're going to build a bunch of different formats. One is ES, ECMAScript, which is going to be our, basically, in our case, it's going to be the same as our index. We're going to build a UMD, which is a universal module definition, which is what was happening inside of that code inside of class names. And we're going to build an immediately invoked functional expression, which is what allows us to dynamically add it to the window, right? If this file, this dist iffy, would be allowed to be included as a script tag. The rest of them are meant for some kind of like build or bundle process, again. So a few different dependencies here. We're going to actually, we need to be able to resolve, we need to be able to transform the common JS, and we need to be able to make a more terse version for our script tag. Terse meaning compact, like minified without making the variables into Unicode or crazy characters, right? So this gives us, as I said, gives us 3 different output files. Plugins are all defined here. We're only using the plugins inside of the IIFE because we need to, because everything else we're just defining as an external dependency. So again, here's our universal module definition, our ECMAScript module definition, and our immediately invoked functional expression, which is a big single line string that includes all of our dependencies, right? This is going to include all the source of case, which was the dependency that we added to make sure that we could test, Oh, yeah, actually this is expected. Because we actually have a different casing in this string, we actually need this to equal something else, right? This test would have passed in the previous build, but now it's going to need to change. So, gotcha. That's good. That's good looking out. Oh, that's what was. Fun stuff. Don't do anything at the end, right before you talk. Yeah. Cool. Great. 2 tests pass. Cool. These 2 tests pass. I think that I'm ready to publish this thing. Right? It's not that hard, right? I mean, whatever. We're going to publish it. In fact, I'm going to, let's see. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment so that I can double check that I have my passwords in place. Okay, it's going to just be an auth token. So. So we're going to publish this, and I'm going to the npm-rc file is what you use to define which registry you're going to attach to. It's what you use to store any credentials. Ideally, you don't actually store credentials in there. You can store them as an environmental variable, or in the case that I'm going to show you here, we're going to just add a user. I've already registered for NPM, but like you don't need to be part of any special organization. You don't need to be. You don't need to have a sponsorship. All you need is an email address that you can actually remember your password for. Ta-da! Okay, I've just logged in on that registry after going through all the flow on their website, right? Great. I'm going to actually go back and look at the package here, because the package is really what's going to allow us to do some of this publishing. So one, we actually need a name. Like we need a valid package JSON. If you're using VS Code or pretty much any IDE that's configured to do JavaScript, it's going to help you define your package JSON, or when you do the npm init to start your package. In this case, it's version 0.2.0. We're adding a feature that we didn't have before, right? The first 0.1.0 was, here's the feature that turns everything into lowercase. This is going to do multiple case, right? So Done, right? That was pretty painless. Once we figured out some code, like once we figured out rollup, once we figured out how to package, it's like I can do this from my local machine all day as long as I'm continuing to increment my version number. Ideally, in a real world scenario, you'd build this into some sort of pipeline, right? Have any of you worked with the CI/CD process before? Yeah, so like one, you can, generally they're triggered off events in whatever source control you're using, right? You can configure them to happen on merge, happen on release, happen on whatever, right? This server in the background is going to run this build and deploy script. Excellent from an organizational perspective because one, you don't have to share credentials with everyone. Two, no individual is able to build and produce and push a package. But NPM really puts guardrails on you, right? I can't publish this again because it's the same version. I can't publish a version previous to this. I can't, it keeps you safe with semantic versioning.
If you want to get the NPM RC to like interact with, say, registry.npmjs.org, you just go to registry.npm.js.org in the browser?
Yeah, right. Yep, so by default, it'll go to npm.org. You can also direct it to whatever registry you want. I think it's just npm set registry, and that will alter that npm file. You can also have a local npm RC file with next to your package JSON that can tell you, I want this namespace to go to this registry, and I want another namespace to go to another registry. So yeah, it's highly configurable.
When I do npm install and get some sort of packet, how does it know what registries to look at?
So if you don't have it defined, it's always going to go to npm.org. If you do have it defined, it's going to go to that one first. As long as your auth is good there, it'll pull it down. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yep, it'll go. Sometimes you'll notice like a lot of NPM packages include a CLI, right? That's a command line interface that'll allow you to use the package in like some slightly different way from your command line. In this case, we want to do that here too. What you'll notice in all packages that include that are additional bin definition inside of the package JSON. In this case, we're going to declare the same name, Hodorify, and we're going to put it in, or we're going to have a different output. This is really easy with our rollup config. We can just, aside from our main package, we can have an additional package that requires it, does something different, and also gets built, right? So I'll actually go into that definition. A few different things. One, you'll notice that the input is different from the other common JS definition. Two, the output is different. We're going to a different and then we're adding a banner at the top of it. Rollup allows you to add any sort of command at the top of your, or any sort of line at the top of your file with this banner. What this does, this is called a shebang. Yeah, I hate that word. This tells you, like, if you're executing this anonymously, it'll tell whatever system you're on to run it in Node, right? And since Node always runs with a common JS definition, we can just use that definition. So we're going to build this. Yes. Increment our version number. And since this actually is like a whole new feature, we're going to go up to version 3, right? It doesn't break the interface at all, so we don't have to go like a whole version number though. Oh, it's going to yell at me. Great. So I just published it and then installed it globally on my machine. You don't have to. Actually publish it in order to install it globally on your machine. You can npm install from any other directory, right? So if I was testing this package out, what I would do is I would go into another directory and I would npm install and then directory that Hodorify was in, right? So that I can test to make sure that it's going to work in all the different formats without having to show the world, right? Ideally, if you're using a package manager or a bundler, too many overloaded terms. If you're using a bundler, you shouldn't have to worry about whether it's configured correctly, but so with the CLI, I was able to take my package JSON and display it as it should be displayed. So packages for better applications, right? There's really 3 main benefits. One is you have more atomic code. Each package is designed to have a single purpose. 2, I already kind of talked about semantic versioning. Allows teams to work better because I can be guaranteed to work with this version while you're working on whatever bug fixes or feature releases that you're working on. And then 3 is easy segmentation. Has anyone ever worked with a Git submodule? Yeah, it's really easy to add them. It's really painful to remove them. So back to this first point, more atomic code. The law of Demeter, I'm not even going to read this because this is a mess of unreadable academic talk about code. But if you want to read this whole paper, it's actually pretty good. But what I'm going to point out, though, is what it says, right? I shouldn't have to know about what the thing that I'm calling is going to do and then have to call another thing because of that. Instead, I should just be able to do a thing, right? So a package really facilitates this because you're able to, like, when you've decided, okay, this is what this package is going to do, it needs to be able to handle that in whatever scenario that it's in. It can't depend on other calls from the application code. Semantic versioning I already went over, a major, a minor, and a patch. And submodules, pretty easy to add, pretty terrible to delete. I have to go to this gist every time I end up having to do one. So more atomic code makes for better testing, right? If I know exactly what this package is supposed to do, I can test it against that. I don't have to worry about my application code. Semantic versioning, better rollout and rollback, and segmentation for better scope teams. I'm going to go over like a use case in kind of a real world scenario. You've got a front end that talks to a microservice, and in the middle, it's got to do this thing where it remaps the stuff and collates it. Actually, very similar to what you were showing, right? Like all the different styles or the different types that are defined in there, right? And even if that microservice happens to change or get added on, I don't really want my application to care about that. I want this layer between that I can understand that the shape of the data is going to be in. Breaking that out into a package is great. It gives you, like when you have a really defined data shape that you want out of a thing, and a defined purpose is when you're going to get the best possible result out of that. Thanks. I'd like to take some questions if you have them. Yes?
So you talked about guardrails
Yes?
Are there any guardrails for like malicious code that you put in it?
Right, so that's actually one of the major complaints around a big open community that, yes, there you can include a potential bad package in there that could inject, third-party code, right? The excellent thing about semantic versioning, though, is that if I pin my dependency to one that I've vetted and tested as good, I can make sure that that version of that dependency is going to be what's injected into my code, right? So we're very tempted to just say, yeah, give me this version or greater, but in a real-world scenario, you need to be doing the work of actively investigating whether or not it's safe to move to the next version.
For subsequent questions, if you have a second mic, so just raise your hand and I'll walk over to you.
How do you find any drawbacks? Like, where do you stop creating new packages? Does it make sense? Where do you say, I don't know, I'll follow this?
Sure, yeah, so the question, when do you stop creating new packages, right? Like, it can be really easy to say, oh, I'm doing this same operation over and over again. It might make sense to make a new package, right? So I think it's a call on your organization, right? Like if you're, the real benefit of building a package is that it's going to be something that you're going to be able to share either from project to project or from server to client, right? If you're writing code that isn't necessarily doing that, it might make more sense in just a subdirectory instead of in its own package, right? You don't want to get too granular, right? Because if you end up with a dependency list that's way too long, any package that, so we use a local NPM registry at Cargill. The project that I'm on, we build out, we have 3 modules that we share between our client and our server. Those we broke into, and then 1 utility library. We chose to do that because it was code that we found ourselves writing again and again, and it wasn't the first choice, right? The first choice was, let's get it to working, then let's get it to better. And in this case, better meant breaking that out into its own atomic package. So, does that answer? Yeah. So the answer is it's totally a judgment call. So yeah. You have a question?
Yeah. So I noticed that on NPM, whenever there's a security vulnerability, it pops up and says hey, you want to upgrade this because there's a security vulnerability. How you would report if you found it in your own code? How you go to is that an NPM thing or is it an API that it does?
So the question was, NPM provides you security vulnerability messages when you install a third-party package. The question is, can you report your own package? I assume you can, but I mean, ideally, you would simply release a newer package, right? You want to, yes, you're saying, how do I alert someone that I've included something bad in my own code, right? Yeah, I imagine, I have not used the process to report a package, but there should be no reason that you can't report your own.
Okay.
Yeah, but there's no unique mechanism within your own package. Yes.
I haven't published too many modules myself, but there's tools you can do to npm deprecate, and you can deprecate a specific version and give a warning why it might be deprecated. I assume audit would be similar, so you can tag any version before this or within a range, saying vulnerable to this, or I don't know, maybe NPM as an organization can come in and add that to specific packages too, if it is discovered through another means.
Right.
Rather than just the author.
So that is really kind of the big theme of this thing, is that NPM is really what is enabling us all to be JavaScript developers today. Give back to the community when you can, and like, yeah.
Less technical question, but if you publish a package, how, is there like a README or, like how do you
Yeah.
find it?
So same as like a Git repository. You have a readme.md right in your. Oh yeah, the question was, is there a README? How can you reach out to like? It'll publish the same readme.md that's adjacent or that's a sibling to your package JSON. In fact, you can inside the package JSON you can declare keywords. You can declare. One, the link to the actual like, GitHub repository, and then 3, you can point to a unique README. So the whole idea is that it's all supposed to be managed by the package JSON, so that it's all in one place. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks again to Zach, to Brian, our speakers this evening. Thanks again to all of our sponsors, and particularly a shout out to all of the folks from Newark who are helping us clean up tonight, in addition to helping us tonight. To that, and if you could look around you before you head out, just clean up anything you see, whether it's rude or not. We all appreciate it. That's the end of the day. Other than that, super awesome. Thanks for being here. See you next month.